University/college lecturers, what's the most bizarre thing you've seen a student do in one of your lectures? I'm an adjunct professor at a few different schools in the NYC area. One spring semester, I was teaching an astronomy course. I had a particularly enthusiastic student. He interrupted class about as often as he contributed, so it balanced out. One day, he saw a young woman outside that he wanted to talk to, so he walked over to the window and climbed out. Fortunately, the classroom was on the first floor. I was so shocked, I just watched him do it. He climbed out the window, walked over to the girl, chatted a bit, and then, I take this as a testament to his interest in my class, he headed back towards the window to return to class. I waved him off and told him to go use a door like a human being. He came back and I went on with class. At the end of the lecture, he stayed behind to apologize and show me his new ADD meds. Apparently, they weren't working that well, so beautiful woman makes the guy climb out a window, but science brought him back. Next story. Student here. Two Asian kids were sitting next to each other during a calc exam using the same calculator and sharing answers while speaking in normal voices, but also in whatever language they spoke. The professor walked up to them and told them to hand him their exams. They ignored him and continued on while he stood there. He eventually tried to grab one of their exams, but they started yelling at him in their language. He didn't want to disrupt the class, so we went back to his desk and waited till they turned them in and then said, "You may not understand English, but you'll understand this," and proceeded to rip their exams in half and throw them in the trash. Or, just handing out a 0 would have sufficed, I think, as well. Kind of lead them on a bit, take the exams in, and then when grades come back, you got a big old goose egg. Next story. College student here. A kid somehow increased the pressure in his water bottle to the point where it shot water almost to the ceiling and then rained down on everyone. The class started laughing. The professor was like, "Whoa." Next story. I was in a CS class and a guy I didn't recognize came in halfway through and sat down next to me. The professor was coding on his laptop, which was projecting on a screen in the front of the lecture hall. All of a sudden, the guy stood up, pointed at the screen, and exclaimed, "There's a bug in the code! A bug!" The professor calmly stated, "Oh, he's right, a missed semicolon." The guy then walked out of class, and the professor just said, I guess he came just to point out that one bug." Next story. I guess I'm one of the few actual lecturers, so I feel I must contribute despite having no amazing stories. I had two students speaking Arabic to each other during the final exam. It was audible to the whole class. When I informed them that they would not pass the exam due to obvious cheating, they were completely incredulous. They couldn't believe that they were not allowed to talk to each other at full volume during a final exam. After a long discussion, one tried to convince me that they were just talking about what they were going to do that night. Bizarre. Also, they had the same wrong answers with the same exact wording. Next story. I was a TA for a calculus class a few years ago. With just under 10 minutes to go and a 50-minute midterm exam, a student bursts into the classroom dressed in a taco costume, sweating, completely out of breath, grabs a test from the front desk and starts to frantically write. At first, I thought it was some prank and I tried to kick him out. Turns out he was enrolled in the class and apparently just passed out at a Halloween party the night before and woke up with time to change clothes. I let him take the test in the remaining 7 or so minutes. Grade distribution was average of about 75%, with one guy scoring 18% and the next lowest at 54%. Plot twist, Taco Dude didn't score the 18%. Next story. Someone in my political philosophy class started watching adult content on his laptop in a large auditorium. A girl behind him yelled, "Can you stop that, please? It's really distracting." The professor was a really nice old lady, and she got startled by the yelling and said, "I'm so sorry." True story in Philadelphia. Next story. Some guy came into one of my lectures and pitched to the entire class about selling a trip to go on a cruise for a really low price. Some people paid him in cash for it, and he even had a portable credit card scanner. In the end, they found out he was a scammer as he was leaving, and professor called security, and he tried to run, but they got him to return all the money. Next story. I teach a freshman zoology lab, more like gross, I guess, but a student dissected a fetal pig while eating a turkey sandwich. One hand in the pig, one hand on the sandwich. Had to kindly tell him to finish eating in the hallway while trying not to vomit. He didn't seem bothered at all, and actually seemed kind of confused as to why I wouldn't let him eat while he did the dissection. Mind you, these fetal pigs had been out for a while, so they smelled like rancid meat. Yeah, anyone that's ever done this before is all too familiar with that pungent smell of like formaldehyde. You just know that you've walked into a grade 9 biology class. Certain smells are just forever ingrained in our minds. Next story. Was in a lecture of 300. You had to hand in your assignment at the start of class, and some dude, who I'm pretty sure never came to class, walks in an hour late, puts his assignment on the table, then scrambles all the assignments around and runs out. Next story. One day, I'm sitting in lecture in one of the top rows, and there's a girl with long hair a few rows ahead of me. All of a sudden, I see something coming around her neck. It's a rat, a white rat. Girl brought her pet rat to class. Girl ended up being my best school friend, and the rat's name is Norma Jean. Next story. A friend sat next to a guy who took out a little baby saw and, over the course of the semester, cut his desk in half until one day after Halloween, there's a huge crack and the desk split in half, which was the first the teacher knew of any of it. Next story. I knew a guy who was taking a class pass-fail. He had already been accepted to his first choice law school and had done well during the first 2/3 of the class, so he needed a 4% on the final exam to pass, graduate, and go to law school. He watched The West Wing every day in class with subtitles for the last month or so. He left like 45 minutes into the 3-hour exam. Next story. We had an exchange student who was supposed to go back to China, living in an old oversized podium desk thing at the back of a large lecture hall for several weeks in one of the campus buildings. He was caught after stealing a laptop out of a professor's office, and they tracked it down while he was using it. It's coming from inside the building. Next story. Student, not lecturer. Last year in my introductory psychology course, we had a student come in and stare down the professor in a full killer psycho clown mask, wig, jumpsuit, and shoes. She stopped mid-lecture and asked the clown what they were doing, and the two of them just had a full-on Western standoff for 5 minutes before the clown walked out without a word. This wasn't a small lecture either. It was over 1,200 people in it, and we were all dead silent. My prof was so flustered after that, she couldn't continue and just dismissed us all. Edit. 1,200 isn't a typo. This is a 3-story amphitheater-style building. Was trying to convey how ballsy this person had to be to pull that off. Home of The Limit does not exist. Next story. I have a professor that asks students who use laptops to move to the back of the room. Why, you ask? Because of an incident he has since named the Funnel of Doom. There was a student a few years ago who sat in the center of the room and proceeded to play Doom for the entirety of the lecture. Everyone behind him was not taking notes. They were watching this kid play Doom. He single-handedly distracted 3/4 of a 100-student lecture. Hence, the Funnel of Doom. Next story. In one of my classes, there was a kid on his cell phone every day in the second row. One day, the professor kicked him out of class for not paying attention. The girl sitting next to him gave the professor a nasty look, and he kicked her out too. In another class, a kid made a essay joke, and the professor kicked him out of the class before we turned in a paper worth 60% of our grade, effectively flunking him. Next story. I'm a student. This guy is at least 35 plus, and he acts like he runs the class and like he's equals with the professor. He'll just get up in the middle of the class while the professor is talking and just walk over to the window and look out of it. He'll stand there like he's Jay Gatsby, or he tries to engage the professor in off-topic political conversations. I cringe so hard. This is why I'm always wary whenever I see someone in my class who's over 30. Next story. Art TA here. A student in my pottery class slipped with edge scoop tool and removed a large chunk of his finger flesh, but I didn't know that at the time. I guess he was embarrassed and didn't want to cause a scene, so he quickly stuck the cut finger in his mouth and swallowed the blood. This must have continued for a few minutes until I made my rounds to see how the class was doing. I noticed he wasn't really working, or he was trying to with one hand, so I asked if everything was all right. Of course, his finger was in his mouth, and his mouth was full of blood, so he couldn't give a verbal answer, but he looked up at me with concern in his eyes. I quietly asked, "Did you hurt yourself?" And he humbly nodded yes. I prompted him to go to the shop bathroom where there's first aid supplies, thinking it could be patched up with some gauze. Just after I dismissed him, he gagged a little and proceeded to throw up what looked like a gallon of gelatinous red-black blood all over the linoleum floor. It was an instant crime scene. Everyone freaked out. Most left the class because they were close to fainting or puking at the sight of it all. I mean, it was a comical amount of blood on the floor. Anyways, the kid's finger was still very much cut and was just shy of actually spraying blood. I grabbed a shop rag and wrapped it as tightly as I could around his finger and told him to keep pressure on it. The rag went red in less than a minute. Ambulance was called. Kid threw up again. Classroom looked like there was blood orgy. Respect the modeling tools. Next story. Our school has a very terrible and strange policy where the freshman experience course has an academic coach who works as a partner with the lecturers. They're supposed to be present in the room and help students with homework, but in practice they just yell at students who slouch. One student came in and the coach told him to remove his hat. The student said F that and just left. Next story. Hearing explosions reverberate through the building was a normal occurrence for several of my lectures. One day, there were a lot of particularly loud explosions, so our professor told us about the cause. Apparently, someone was doing research on how explosive shock waves affect the human body, and we were hearing them blow up cadavers. Edit. I should add that this was in one of the engineering buildings and that the research was being done to develop more effective blast shielding for soldiers. Next story. A girl in my econ recitation, not class, we basically did problems and stuff once a week, got called out for being wrong for something like that. Not in a rude way, just the TA wanting to fix her mistake. Started crying and never showed up to the recitation again. It was really sad. Next story. I knew a girl that fell asleep during a lecture, was tapped on the head by the lecturer, then proceeded to throw a fit about how much of an a-hole he was for not taking her into consideration, as she was, quote, clearly tired because she didn't eat enough, and then proceeded to bawl her eyes out for at least 15 minutes without leaving, making sure the lecture could not proceed. She came back and did it pretty frequently. Next story. Not a lecturer, but on the last day of class freshman year, something amazing happened in Psych 1. In the middle of class, this dude's phone goes off, and he answers it all nonchalantly. He then gets extremely serious, changes his tone of voice, and says, "The city's in trouble? Why, of course, Mr. Mayor, I'll be right there." He then rips open his shirt, exposing the Superman insignia, and full-on sprints out of the lecture hall. The prof is pissed, but he keeps teaching. About 5 minutes later, this kid bursts into the lecture hall, clad in full Superman attire. He proceeds to yell at the top of his lungs, "The city is in trouble! Justice League, assemble!" Like 5 other people stand up and begin tearing off their clothes. The prof starts screaming as Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, Aquaman, The Flash, and others sprint out of the room to go save Metropolis. It was amazing. Yeah, I wish I could have seen this one in person. This is a very well choreographed, thought out prank. Very fun, ultimately harmless. It's just cool. Why is the teacher mad at this? Next story. In college, a large group of friends, 25 to 30 guys, and I were taking a general ed class of 300 students. The teacher told those who wanted to add the class that he wouldn't do so until the 4th week of class. Our midterm was during the 5th week. One of our friends wasn't able to add the class during the 4th week due to overcapacity. We had this brilliant idea and convinced him to take the midterm, but halfway through, stand up, rip his Scantron and test up, have a tantrum, and yell something like, "I can't take this anymore," and run out of the lecture hall. He did this and did it in style. About 4 or 5 TAs ran after him to try and catch him. This wasn't going to happen, though, as he was an 801-mile runner for a Division I track team. Next story. Student here. A kid in my class are up in the middle of a lecture and interrupted the professor and says, "How can everyone sit here with that beautiful sunset happening right now? I have to go watch it." He gets up, leaves all of his stuff, then goes outside, comes back 20 minutes later, and tries to show the professor pictures of the sunset. The professor couldn't stop laughing. He also did many other strange things. Next story. Not a lecturer, but a student. Guy next to me pulled out a George Foreman grill today, set it on his desk, and put his notebook on it. Didn't actually use it, just took notes on it. Next story. In my biological literature course, mostly juniors and seniors, were given over 2 months to prepare a 15-minute lecture to be presented in front of the class. One of the students did his presentation on mermaids and used scenes from the Animal Planet mockumentary as part of his presentation. This was not a joke. This kid absolutely did not realize that the mermaid documentary was fake. He honestly thought that various scenes of the CGI'd mermaids was real. How he made it so far as a biology major still baffles me. I don't think I've ever felt more uncomfortable. Next story. When I was a student, I took an intro to bio class that was traditionally a weed out class. Lots of A-type pre-med kids would bring in voice recorders to record the lectures. One day in class, I start hearing this jumble of words like someone is talking over the professor. I look over and this really spacey looking girl has a collection of like 40 of those record a message to go with your picture frames, and is holding them up to record. Bear in mind, these things hold max, maybe 30 seconds of audio each. So she just keeps holding them up one after the other and recording the lecture 30 seconds at a time, and every now and then hits the playback button to make sure it's working. It was the weirdest thing I've ever seen. Next story. Valentine's Day of freshman year, in a lecture hall of 600 students, a guy in underwear and a cape came running through the front of the class cheering, "Woohoo!" then ran out the door on the opposite side of the room. Everyone was stunned for a minute before the prof said, "Not every day you lose your virginity." Standing ovation. Next story. Macroeconomics class, about 40 people total. Everyone typically sat in the same places, and I felt like I had a handle on who everyone was. One day, a guy came in a bit early, sat down towards the middle of the room, and put a brown paper grocery bag down underneath his seat. He never took off his hood and never took off his sunglasses. I had never seen him before, and he was sitting in a seat typically occupied by another student. One of the more vocal students, we'll call him Bob, was sitting 2 seats away from this guy. About 15 minutes into the lecture, Bob started in on a rather lengthy question. While he was talking, the hooded mystery man stood up, picked up the grocery bag, reached inside, and proceeded to pull out a banana cream pie and throw it in Bob's face. It was a good hit, too. Stuck to his head for a second before falling off, clinging to his glasses. The hooded guy ran out, and one of the ex-military students got up and chased after him, ready to fight. No one ever found him or heard about what happened. Bob had no idea who the guy was or what the motivation was. It was the perfect crime. Next story. It wasn't during a lecture, but right after one when the teacher is gathering her stuff and students approach with questions. I was with a friend who had missed class but had an assignment to turn in and wanted to catch the teacher at a good time. His project is a PowerPoint on a USB. Now, my friend is a bare minimum type of guy and not very creative or imaginative. He's probably used the USB twice, and for all I know, it's otherwise blank. Well, he talks to the teacher, who accepts his project but wants to see it right then and there. My friend pops it into the classroom computer and begins to autoplay the first media it finds, which is a wide-eyed, large-breasted girl deep-throating a chubby guy's chicken. I laughed so hard, as did his professor, who was female. She couldn't help but laugh at the sheer ridiculousness of the situation, but believe me, she was struck by a shock only a fraction less than my friend's. One of the funniest things I've seen. Unfortunately, he waited at the end of the line of students with questions, so no one else saw. Well, not sure if it quite counts, since it was done on accident. Yeah, something like this absolutely does count, because, as you said, sometimes you just have to laugh at how ridiculous a situation has become. Next story. During one of my lectures, we were all doing group presentations. One group was doing a presentation on some genetic disorder that causes you to be unaware of social norms and to behave irrationally. At the end of the presentation, which was at the time limit, asked if he could still show a short 15-second clip. You could see the 3 girls in his group get extremely uncomfortable. The professor just smiled and said sure. It was a 15-second clip of a steamy softcore bed makeout scene with 2 chicks. The clip ended and the kid goes, "So if you had this condition, you wouldn't understand how showing that in class would be unacceptable." I hear a kid in the back yell, "Holy F!" while he's busting out laughing. Only me and him were laughing. The professor just turned beet red and got this 1,000-yard stare. Next story. In my linear algebra and differential equations class, I saw 2 guys who weren't students enter the classroom and unload their super soakers on another student while he was finishing up his homework for submission at the end of the lecture. He and his homework were completely drenched. Meanwhile, my professor, wheelchair-bound from his MS, didn't see a thing because he was busy writing on the blackboard. Next story. While I was TAing for a medical anthropology lecture, I had to go into detail regarding Brazilian travestis and their sexual and gender identities. After wrapping up what I thought was an interesting and thorough presentation, I had a student calmly stand up, utter some homophobic statements about travestis, and then sit back down. Rather than kick him out or report him, the professor and I challenged him to more adequately explain his opposition to the travesti lifestyle. I'm not sure if he was expected to be kicked out or what, but he refused to respond and just stonewalled the rest of the lecture. Next story. Student here, not bizarre, so much as rude. This one kid sat in the front row, loudly eating a sandwich, talking to his friend about how he already knew the material and how pointless the class was. The professor was kind of hard of hearing, so he never noticed, but every single student in the lecture hall did. Next story. I'm a TA. I teach Chem Lab. There's a dress code for the class. Closed-toed shoes, long pants, goggles, and either a long-sleeve shirt or lab coat, for safety reasons. One of my students came in only wearing socks. She doubled them up, after one of my students turned his lab reports into really weird creative writing pieces. One of his reports started like, "Science rules, it's everywhere, like water, the universal solvent." Nothing too exciting. I wish I had weirder kids. That being said, the most bizarre student I've ever experienced was a classmate in a class I took in undergrad. He would always take off his shoes and put his legs up on the desk while slurping on Lipton iced tea. He'd randomly burp really loudly in class. He also liked to interrupt with interesting commentary. For example, one day our professor was talking about how we exhale when we speak. The kid responds with a relevant story about how he and his brother speak while inhaling. He then proceeds to demonstrate by speaking while inhaling. I suggest you do this out loud so you know what it sounds like. The words, "We call it vampire voice." Guy was super weird. Holy crap, I just googled him and he stabbed someone. Edit. My student was wearing clothes, just no shoes. I just wanted to take another second to do the vampire voice. Really isn't that cool, is it? Next story. So, a teacher of mine happened to be from the first graduating class of Evergreen State College back in 1967. For those of you that aren't from the Pacific Northwest, Evergreen is essentially the hippie/hipster school. All classes are pass-fail, and you essentially design your own degree program. It's a very neat school, but definitely not for everyone. Anyways, my teacher would love to go on and on about the things that would happen back at Evergreen in the 60s. One example that stood out was that one of his professors loved to smoke, as in constantly. He would sit cross-legged in the middle of the room and smoke on his pipe, letting the smoke lazily rise out of his mouth. When a student would answer a question, he would open one eye to answer them and then closed both eyes again and resumed smoking. One day, the students were listening to a lecture of his, but unfortunately, he didn't seem to be making a lick of sense. A student finally interrupted his ramble with, "I'm sorry, but I have no idea what you've been trying to say." And he responded bluntly, "That's because you're not high." He proceeded to pass the pipe around the classroom. Next story. I was in a philosophy class during my freshman year of college where the professor always showed up 15 minutes early. He was the kind that was a quirky genius and his routine was impeccable. One day, he does not show up early, and a few minutes before class, a girl says to the class, "Hey, wouldn't it be great if he didn't show up today?" And almost immediately after that comment, another member of the philosophy department entered and told us that our prof had a stroke the night before. The look on her face was priceless. Sadly, the man died shortly after. Next story. Late to the party, but a kid got up running and screaming like a girl and had his shirt off before he got to the door. For a few minutes, everyone just sat there not sure what the F just happened or how to react. Even the professor was in shock. He came back like 2 minutes later saying a bee got into his shirt and he was severely allergic. Next story. Student here as well. This kid sat down next to me in my public speaking class, eating a donut on a paper plate. I look over at him and I talked a bit, and notice a ton of writing on his donut paper plate. License plate number, phone numbers, scribbled nonsense all over it. I inquire. He tells me he smashed into someone's car and told him he had a test, so he asked they write down all their information on his donut plate so he could call them back. I laughed. After class, I watched him throw away the donut paper plate. Edit. I left out the fact that we didn't have a test that day. Next story. Not a professor. Was in a 1.5-hour American history class with a good friend of mine. Lecture hall of at least 100 junior year students, all familiar with the routine, all just wanting to pass the class and move on. A few days prior to the first lecture of the week, our prof was discussing attributes of different US presidents for some reason that I don't remember. Flash forward to 45 minutes into today's lesson, my friend spontaneously yells, "Grover Cleveland!" to the entire class. Scared the crap out of me, confused the hell out of everyone else in the class, including the prof, who just stood there not knowing what to do or think. "I'm sorry, what?" was the most he could summon. Friend just looked back at him, equally scared and nervous. Everyone in the room just pretended that it didn't happen, and class resumed. To this day, my friend has no idea why, when his brain decided to just completely shut off all awake. Those were the words that the last spasm of brain activity puked out. Next story. My first day teaching, ever, was probably the most bizarre. I was explaining disability services and used myself as an example. I have carpal tunnel, and we used disability services to get extended test time or permission to type an exam. The first lecture went smoothly, but after class, a student approached me. He walked up to me and said, "I'd like to pray for you. Jesus can heal your wrists. Can I pray for you?" I'm an atheist, but it was a very sweet offer, so I smiled and said, "Thank you. I appreciate that." He grabbed my wrists and closed my eyes while he, part silent, part spoken, said a prayer to heal my wrists. Sweet kid. Odd first encounter. Sadly, Jesus decided my wrists weren't worth healing, and I still have carpal tunnel. Next story. Once I was proctoring an exam and had these two Chinese students sitting right next to each other. I knew they were either dating or just kind of seeing each other, but I figured it didn't really matter. They were both doing well up to that point. 20 minutes into the exam, the guy stands up and brings his test to me, and it looks fairly stellar. It was basic mechanics, but still. He then proceeded to sit down next to his girlfriend, give her a peck on the cheek, take her test from her, and begin filling it out. I was like 10 feet away. Just stared at him, waiting for him to look up. It didn't happen. He just powered through the entire exam again while she sat there happily staring at him. 15 minutes later, he got up and handed the exam to me again, still before anyone else had finished. Though I suspect there was a good amount of just everyone else noticing and staring too. He handed him the first two exams, but one with his girlfriend's name on it. The two of them got up, held hands, and walked out. The next week for recitation, the two of them just sat there and gave me this puzzled look when I gave them back to them with zeros on them, and never let them sit next to each other again. Neither of them pushed the issue further. Seriously though, what the F? Ballsy move, kid. Do not be fooled here, everybody. This is true love. This is what true love is. Get yourself a significant other that is willing to take your test for you. That's amazing. Still deserve a zero, though. Next story. Student, not lecturer. We had a girl in one of my classes who would constantly interrupt the professor with pointless questions, at least 15 to 20 times every 1.5-hour class. It actually got to the point where we took bets on how many she'd have in a given day, and nobody ever bet below 12, and often we all bet too low. She'd also follow up with questions with "because," then go into a 5-minute anecdote completely unrelated to the subject at all. It was a two-professor class, and when one prof was lecturing, the other was sitting in the corner of the front row listening. One of the profs was a French history expert, and this girl who kept interrupting was constantly trying to impress her. Here's a few of the things she did. She showed up to the discussion 45 minutes late, threw open the door, and basically shouted, "Bonjour, everyone," before sitting down like there was nothing wrong with it. She followed the professors around after class, while they were clearly trying to ignore her or get away from her. She regularly would come in to lecture at least half an hour late, then ask the professor mid-lecture what she'd missed. And then there was this. After one of the profs mentioned that fish and chips was effectively the first fast food, it was a class on European family life in the 1800s. Her raises hand. Prof sighs heavily. "Yes." "What's fish and chips?" "It's battered fried cod and fried salted potatoes." Professor is flustered and takes a few seconds to gather himself to continue the lecture. She's sitting behind me, so I turn around and say, "Have you really never had fish and chips before?" And she goes, "No," turns to the French history professor, "but I've had a baguette." Next story. Two stories. First day of class, January. Just finished the syllabus with the schedule for tests and the rest of the term. Any questions? Guy puts his hand up and comments on the date of the midterm test. "But that's St. Patrick's Day." I was impressed. Second, two young ladies in the front row of a large classroom with steeply sloped rows of long desks stretching across the room. 3 times during the term, I noticed they were petting each other under the desks. Nobody else could see it because of the slope in the room, but standing at the front of the room, I could see underneath the desk because it was raised up a bit from the floor. Very distracting. The am I really seeing what I think I'm seeing kind of thing. Also, a situation where you couldn't exactly say to them, stop doing that in the class, or even talking to them after the class. I tried to think of a way to discreetly ask them not to do it in class without it being supremely embarrassing to them and to me. I could never figure out whether they were trying to secretly let me see what they were up to, or if they somehow thought I wouldn't quite notice it. Damn, the lectures that term required some concentration. Next story. I got one. I had a fairly short lecture, but it made for a good story afterwards for what happened during. Midway through, I hear the crinkling of plastic, and lo and behold, some kid in the front row is assembling a sandwich with mayo, turkey, and those plastic-wrapped Kraft singles. Not an impressive sandwich, either. But what can you expect with the budget of a college student? I didn't think anything of it, because I didn't want to single the kid out. Right as I caught him finishing, I nonchalantly walked over and snatched it from his desk and took a bite. The class thought it was pretty funny. So did I. I skipped lunch that morning. Next story. Not a lecture, but a student. The first day of spring semester, it was raining torrentially and the streets were flooding. This was in Houston. So a lot of people who lived off campus were unable to make it to class. Our professor checked his email and started cracking up, so he put the email up on the projector for us all to see. One of our classmates, who had never met the professor before, since it was the first day of class, had emailed, "Sorry, I won't be able to make it to class today. I tried to ford the river and my oxen died." TLDR, classmate tried to ford the river and his oxen died. Okay, I have no idea what is being talked about here. I'm assuming that this is some kind of meme or inside joke, but yeah, went right over my head. Next story. In science class, one week the lecturer walked out of the room to answer a call. One kid jumps up and grabs her keys off the lectern and proceeds to open the chemical cupboard. He comes wandering back with something the size of a baseball impaled on a fork. He sits down at the end of the lab desk I was sitting at and starts rolling it around the desk. At this point, I realize what it is and scream at him to get rid of it. It was a massive ball of potassium. He panics and throws it into the sink next to him, which is full of water, at which point it explodes and fires straight up in a smoky ball of flame, hitting the ceiling about 20 feet up, and falls back down into the sink, burning violently, cracking the sink and generating enough fumes to clear out the 50-plus room. He was called Bill after that, as in Bill Nye. Next story. A few years back, I was taking some classes, and we had a couple particularly irritating girls sitting in the front row of me chattering away. Very clearly did not want to be there. Me and the girl next to me have put up with this for about a week. People around them have shushed them to no avail. The girl next to me finally leans forward and says in a very low, even tone of voice, "If you don't stop talking, I'm going to kill you with a hammer." The girls gave her a weird look and rolled their eyes, preparing to continue the conversation. The girl next to me reaches into her bag, pulls out a hammer, and just places it on the table next to her in full view of one of the girls who's turned sideways. They both just kind of trail off. The girl and I fist bumped. They moved to the other side of the room the next day. Who just walks around with a hammer in their bag like that? I guess, to pose empty threats such as this. But you got the desired result, so yeah, nothing wrong with that. Next story. Student here. Sorry, I'm breaking the rules. Don't hurt me. One time in my Japanese class, this guy brought a praying mantis to class. I'm normally terrified of all bugs, and the dude sits right behind me. But I wasn't too bothered by it because I realized it was just going to sit on his shoulder all class and not fly off. But it was interesting to see that in class. He was feeding it lettuce and everything. Next story. Not the lecture, but back in one of the engineering lectures, we had multiple blackboards, the ones where you can slide around and hide and reveal others. Prior to the lecture, someone drew a massive chicken on one of the boards and hid it at the furthest back, knowing our lecturer will use all the boards in his lectures. Now, this lecture is known for his hot temper, and his subject is materials science. Imagine the part where he was talking about stiffness of materials and various properties. He then proceeded to slide the board to the last one, and lo lo and behold, a giant chicken happily staring into his face. Imagine if you can use your talent for something useful. We were disappointed that this was the only thing we got out of him prior to him erasing his work of art. It may not be the strangest thing to happen, but damn, it was still funny. Next story. When I was a TA, one of the students offered me $5 for the answers to the final exam, 60% of the grade, of a senior level class. First of all, I'm like 2 years older than you. Why the hell do you think I'm given that much power that I'd have all the answers a month ahead of time? Second, $5 for a class that was $5,000 at least. Really, dude? Even if I didn't have anything to lose, I'd report that kid for being an idiot. Edit. I mean, I wouldn't have shared the answers with him, even if I didn't have anything to lose. $5 for college final answers is just insulting to both of us. Me, because you think I'm an idiot, and you, because you look like an idiot. Next story. While taking attendance on the first day of classes, I told students to let me know if they have a nickname or something else they'd like to be called. A student with a difficult last name says, "My name is John Smith, but my friends call me Tails." So I say, "Should I call you Tails then?" To which he replies, "No, just matter of fact." Nope, I'm not his friend, apparently. As he was walking out, I noticed that he had a 3-foot-long raccoon tail pinned to the back of his jeans. It was super weird. Next story. My uni had a Medal of Honor recipient come speak at the school. Right as it was starting, this kid in sweatpants, t-shirt, and backwards flat-brimmed hat walks in and can't find a seat. The front row was left empty on purpose, and guess what? This kid sits in the front row. During the speaker's presentation, he was texting and doing things on his phone. Grinding my gears to no end. Next story. A girl in a number of my classes in college wore animal ears or some sort, and in every class, no matter what the subject, would talk about how her parents sent her off to fat farms as a child. We could be discussing statistics, but yet fat farms and animal ears. Next story. A student slowly ramped up her snuggling, caressing, kissing of a guy next to her. She had her tongue in his ear and her hand inside his shirt by the end of the lecture. The entire time she was looking straight at me, her male professor, and smiling this naughty smile. Guy never took his eyes off my slides and never responded to her. Good students, the both of them. Next story. A dude in my freshman history class in college fell asleep during the lecture, or so I thought. He started quivering and breathing real loud. Thought it was weird, but let the dude roll with it. Not my grade, not my problem mindset. Well, after this has been going on for probably 5 to 10 minutes, not real sure, the guy sitting behind us taps me and says, "Is he all right?" I shrugged and gave him the "how the F should I know" look. He tapped the dude to wake him up, but he doesn't react. He gave him a good push on the back and he still didn't react. Now everyone around us is staring at him and starting to freak out. This girl stands up a few rows back and shouts, "Call 911" at us. Another person said, "I think he's having a seizure," and then pointed at me saying, "Make sure he hasn't choked on his tongue." So I squat in front of his seat and try to get my hands under his face without moving him too much, and basically spent 2 to 3 minutes trying to open his mouth to check his tongue, because I have no effing idea what I'm doing. By this point, a paramedic rolls into the auditorium and gets to the guy and starts helping him. They took the dude out of the auditorium, and everyone was still kind of in that "what the F just happened" phase, including the professor. Then, one of my buddies sitting in the back of the auditorium stands up and says, "Way to go, B2, you just killed that guy." So I'm embarrassed as hell and feel like crap. The professor finally gets order of the room and continues lecturing. Well, about 15 minutes later, the bro who had the seizure walks back into class and sits at his desk like nothing happened. And, well, that's all I have to say about that. Next story. I had a student have a mental breakdown in class. I feel bad even typing about it because he was obviously very ill. Like, it started off kind of funny because everyone thought he was just playing around, but it quickly devolved, like panting, shaking, rambling about stuff that didn't make sense while not finishing sentences. Obviously something very, very off. I had no idea what to do because I literally would not continue with class, and at the moment, I blanked on what the policy was for this situation. Toward the end, I felt like he might be a danger to himself, but then he darted out and I couldn't stop him, and Oh my god, was it awful. I ended up calling my department, and it is a long story, but he was someone known on campus and ended up getting help and not hurting himself. It was just very bizarre, and I still feel guilty that I wasn't more prepared to deal with it. I now know every policy regarding mental health. Next story. Probably too late to bother, but during a lecture I was giving, more like a small lesson before a student lab work session, someone burst in the lab wearing a bandana outfit. He was running around the room screaming, "Save me! Save me!" when in bursts a guy in a gorilla suit. By then, the banana man had hidden behind me and opened one of those single shot bottles of Jaeger. With the gorilla on approach, Banana Man insisted the only way he could be saved from a certain gorilla doom was to take the shot of Jaeger. "Do it! Do it! Do it!" chanted the class. After a brief hesitation, I took the shot to a round of applause. Gorilla and Banana Man exited the lab, and all the students worked diligently for the next 90 minutes. It was never mentioned again. Wait, that's not a bizarre thing a student did. Whatever. Bring on the complete lack of any votes. Next story. I guess you can call this weird in the sense that it's definitely not something that normally happens in a lecture hall. I was a TA in a film class, about 300 students, where we showed a movie every class. During the middle of one of the movies, a student came in through the back door, which we told them repeatedly not to do because the back doors open to the outside and flood the room with light. But on top of that was also shining the flashlight on his phone everywhere and basically being extremely inconsiderate. The professor asked me to go talk to the guy, so I go in back and I start out polite, saying, "Excuse me, will you shut off your phone's light?" He ignores me. So I say much more forcefully, "Turn off that light right now." To which he responds, "Don't you disrespect me like that." "Excuse me?" I say. "Don't you disrespect me like that," he repeats. Now I'm really pissed off. "I'm the head TA in this class," I tell him, "and I'm telling you to shut your light off." "I don't care who you are," he says. "I'm not going to take any disrespect from you." That's when I really lost it. "Leave this room right now or I will call security and have you thrown out." This is when he got up in my face and screamed, "I want to talk to the professor because I do not tolerate this kind of disrespect from anyone." "He's up front," I tell him. "Go talk to him." "I am," he says, "and I'll be filing a formal complaint against you." "Go right ahead," I tell him. The professor heard him. The entire room heard him by that point, and he ushered the guy down one of the long entryways that led to the interior of the building. I decide it's for the best that I not be involved in the situation any further and go back to my post. I'm not worried because the professor is a very mellow old man and is very good at calming situations down. However, after about a minute, I hear the guy screaming full throat at the professor. This was when I had to make a difficult decision. I knew reinserting myself into the situation would be potentially explosive, but I also knew that if this guy was going to become violent, I wanted that violence directed at me and not the 60-plus-year-old professor. I was reluctant to send another TA. All of the ones present in the room were women. There were 2 other male TAs, but both of them were out, for the same reason. So, knowing I was about to cause a potential crap storm, I stepped around the corner. Sure enough, when the guy saw me, he went ballistic. He starts screaming at me about how I disrespected him, and I had no right to do that. I'm trying to explain to him that what he did was disrespectful, but I'm having to raise my voice trying to talk over him. It then hit me how much we were disrupting the film, so I ushered everyone outside. That's when the guy really ripped into me. He starts screaming about how the reason he had his flashlight on was because his leg was injured in Iraq and he needed to see where he was going, and I was crap compared to him, and I wasn't worthy of being in the same space as him. At this point, I no longer gave a F and screamed at him that no one as rude as him would ever get any respect from me. That was when one of the other TAs stepped out to tell us she had called the police. That was also when I noticed that all of the athletes and bodybuilders in the class had formed a semicircle behind me, ready to jump if the guy really lost it. At that point, though, someone walked up to the guy and led him away while the professor, myself, and the TA who called the police waited for the police to show up. Long story short, the police showed up, took a statement, the student's TA, who had snuck out of the movie to do some homework, showed up, and that's when I learned that the guy had severe PTSD and a long list of trigger warnings that he was supposed to be aware of, one of which was to never discipline the student in front of other students. It had not occurred to this TA that he would need to notify the rest of us about these triggers, though in his defense, I don't know if it would have occurred to me either. Obviously, if I'd known about the guy's PTSD triggers, I would have handled the situation differently, but I thought I was dealing with a self entitled a hole and handled the situation the way I would handle the self entitled a hole. Basically, tell him to F off without using the words F off. After I gave a statement to the police, I went back to the room, but the guy had a meeting with the professor, his TA, the police, and his VA representative. They got the guy calmed down, and later that evening, he sent an apology email to all the TAs. All the same, it was mutually agreed that he and I not have any interactions anymore. A couple weeks after that, though, he wound up dropping the class anyway because it was also apparently causing him too much anxiety to be in a dark, crowded room. His TA even offered to let him leave the room when the movie started and to just watch it on his own time, but he dropped anyway. I do feel bad for the guy, and I really hope his condition doesn't keep him from getting a good education, because someone who's been through what he's been through deserves to get a good education and to get his life back on track. Next story. Okay, so I was the one to do this. I figure the professor in the class probably tells it as one of his "you can't believe what this student did one time" stories. The prof had been screwing with our heads all semester, staging little scenarios that looked like conflicts between him and students, pretending to have Tourette's on the first 3 class sessions, etc. So I was dead determined to get him back. We were told that the final exam for our psych class was open book. On the last day of class, as he was handing out the huge final exam, I pulled out my textbook, still wrapped in the original plastic from the bookstore. I conspicuously and loudly unwrapped the book, made it creak as I broke the spine, and then got up and threw away the plastic wrap in the bin next to the professor's desk. The look he gave me when I did that was priceless. The look he gave me when I completed the exam in a quarter of the allotted time without once opening the new book was doubly priceless. The look he gave me when he graded my test with 100% correct multi-choice questions and nearly perfect essay responses was just damn ridiculous. There wasn't any trick involved. I had originally been given a defective book from the bookstore. A huge chunk of wages hadn't been bound properly, so I took it back to the store for a replacement. We'd already gone a couple of lessons, and I had become tired of his screwing with us, so I decided to keep the replacement wrapped and just deal with the loose pages on the original one. I was a good student, and it was actually an interesting subject, so paying attention and studying hadn't been the issue. I had planned to take advantage of the open book nature of the test, but found that I knew the material well enough that I didn't need it. Next story. Like nearly everyone else here, I'm not a professor, but have a story from one. My prof teaches anthropology, forensics, and diverse sexuality courses at a community college. He once recalled to the class that there have only been 2 times where he's been made speechless while teaching a class. Once, while mid-sentence during a lecture, a girl stood up and bursted out, "I'm a lesbian!" at the top of her lungs. He apparently just stood there without any idea what to say as it came out of the blue. He eventually spoke, "All right." The second, and more entertaining, time he's been left speechless was when he was talking to the class about the indigenous squirrels in the area. Eventually, one of the male students said, "Oh yeah, I have one of those. Want to see?" My prof was a little confused and asked, "You have a squirrel?" The student replied, "Yes, I have a squirrel in my pants." My professor stood speechless as the young man proceeded to stand up, reach into one of his pants pockets, and pulled out a content and very much alive squirrel. My prof had no idea what to say. Sure, there must be rules about allowing animals in class, but this was just too absurd. He let the man put the squirrel back in his pocket and continued to lecture class. Okay, so that second story, that squirrel story, didn't quite go where I thought it was going to go, but it's still just as weird. You never know what these kids hide in their pants. Next story. My history teacher, who everyone just calls Doc, just told us this story today. One day, as a college teacher's assistant, he was asked by this 40-something-year-old lady if he can record his lecture to help her study. Doc didn't see the harm in it and let her, so she put this tape recorder on his desk. This was about 40 years ago, so not too weird. Halfway in the middle of class, while Doc is in the middle of lecturing, the lady started crawling on the ground through the other students' seats to Doc's desk. She was trying to be sneaky and not be seen, but everyone was staring at the supposedly mature lady shimmying like a kid playing army crawler. She finally got up to Doc's desk and fumbled her hand over the top of it to get her tape recorder. Doc told her to stand up, as she already disturbed the class enough, and tell him why she did that. "I ran out of tape, and I didn't want to bother anyone."